Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Business. Good, Kevin, good. All right. Let's continue, Kraut. Chapter 2. Chaptura dos. If you are new, hello guys. My name is Connor. If you're old, then welcome back. Let's go. I consider watching Chapter 1. Either my reaction to it or right from the channel. Let's go. Yeah, it went kind of setting the stage for somewhat modern history. It went from the ancient past, talking about copper mines in North Turkey being crucial, and the upper part of the Tigris and Euphrates River, and how Turkey, Anatolia, is just a perfect spot to start a civilization, and how the Bronze Age collapse, Persians coming in, Macedonians, Greek, kind of just setting the stage. Let's go. If you aren't ready to learn, there's the door. Get out.
Our ancestors were all nomads. For the first several 10,000 years of our species' existence, man and woman were wanderers. The discovery of fire, the first to make tool flint, and those who painted the vast, beautiful cave paintings in places such as Chauvet in France, were people constantly on the move. And move they had to. The protein they relied on for their diet was meat, which is a more concentrated protein than plant food. Eating meat also cuts down the time spent eating by 2/3. But meat is harder to acquire, especially for a slow creature like a human being having to hunt creatures that are adapted to fleeing far faster predators than men. To be able to hunt such prey, it requires specialization and collective effort. And it also requires movement, because hunting cannot sustain a growing population at one spot over time. The extent to which a patch of land can sustain a hunting population is limited by the game being hunted, its cyclical patterns of migration, and that leaves hunters with the very stark choice of either moving with the game or starvation. Early humans didn't become nomads by choice, but because they had no other choice. At around 10,000 BC, something happened that disrupted the nomadic lives of many early humans. The Ice Age ended. And with the change in climate and landscape that reshaped the world's geography, river valleys and vast fertile plains capable of sustaining agriculture formed that invited these early people in to settle. However, in free regions of the world, geography still lent itself to the life of the nomad. The plains of North America, the savannas of Africa, and the vast steppes of Asia. As people settled in the Fertile Crescent, the Nile Valley, the Indus River Valley, and the Yellow River Valley, the peoples of the steppe had no place to settle. The agricultural revolution of 10,000 BC also brought a new addition that affected the lives of nomads as well: the domestication of animals. Reindeer, goats, and sheep domesticated changed the nomad life from hunter-gatherers to herders. Through this, the nomads took upon themselves the responsibility of nature. Providing food for the herded animals required the nomads to continue traveling in search of pastures to graze. A nomad's life is a harsh and unforgiving life. Life is an endless ritual revolving around the animals.
Nothing like this is surprising to me, but he's saying it in such a nice way. This is a great channel. Good job on recommending.
The horses, the sheeps, the dogs, the goats take center stage in life and community. A tribe's value and strength are measured by its animals. Constant moving and dedication to survival leave little room for specialization, as all specialization is dedicated to the herd and the tribe. Survival requires a simple life as a nomad. Within settled civilizations, the surplus in food allowed for a surplus in labor pool who could specialize in masonry, metalwork, writing, governance, and more. However, specializations within settled communities have disadvantages compared to nomadic civilizations. A farmer is specialized to be a farmer. A mason is specialized to be a mason, neither are warriors. In comparison, a nomad will always be a herder, a hunter, and a warrior at the same time. Civilization also comes with civilization diseases, which most nomads avoid, resulting in longer average life expectancy for a nomadic culture. And in that position, a nomad can also acquire technologies of settled peoples by simply taking them or trading them. One of the largest geographic landscapes in the world are the Eurasian Steppes. They stretch out from the Balkans to the Pacific coast over a total of over 4,000 miles in length and up to 1,000 miles wide. This vast landscape is almost in its entirety flat, grassy plains, stretching out endlessly into the horizon, dotted with a few deserts and hills. Only a few mountains and lakes pierce through this endless landscape. There are no rivers to settle around, no large fertile fields to irrigate, no mountains to build borders around, no boulders to make walls with, and no forests to log and build with. So the people who inhabited these lands remained nomadic as most others settled. And who these people were is somewhat hard.
Okay, so that makes sense. So you were nomadic until you kind of settle upon a region where certain geographical defenses and fruits of nature, like a tillable earth and available wildlife to be domesticated. But in a place like the Eurasian Steppe, it's just, there's no place to do that. Okay.
Hard to define. People are different from animals in that we don't just leave behind what we were when we die, but also what we made. And with nomads, there is not much being left behind. No buildings, walls, or castles. To nomadic peoples, everything is always used, nothing is wasted, and therefore almost nothing is left behind. The best an archaeologist can hope for are burial mounds, and what we find in them may contradict stereotypes that you may have of the supposedly scruffy poor nomad. The armor of the Golden Warrior can be seen in the Kazakhstan National Museum and was presumably worn by a Scythian warrior 2,400 years ago. From Kazakhstan to Ukraine to Russia to Mongolia, what we find proves considerable wealth and fortunes belonged to the tribes inhabiting these lands. But we also find arrowheads and helmets made of bronze and other materials. Metalwork, however, is a specialization that nomads don't have access to, which shows to us.
Well, he said themselves that one of the ways is they can take it from other more developed civilizations. I'm not saying that there's no way these people were capable of doing this. It's just, it doesn't mean that they definitely did, because he said they could have taken it.
Us that they gained such either through trade, tribute, or force. Beyond the physical evidence found in burial mounds, it is possible to draw a map with borders detailing which nomadic tribe lived where in which parcel of these vast lands. However, for people constantly on the move, owning land makes no sense.
So I really want to know about the orange one.
However, for people constantly on the move, owning land makes no sense. The idea of a border also makes no sense. The only border a nomad knows is an ocean a horse can't ride, a jungle a horse can't cross, a desert a horse won't survive in, and a mountain a horse can't jump over. And because of this, when speaking of nomads, the idea of a people or nation in our sense doesn't make sense. Nomads see themselves more...
Does it make sense what I mean? Like, he's saying stuff that I want to say, like, oh, I knew that, but he's presenting it in such a great way. And maybe it's his voice, too. It's just very... I feel like I can just sit and I'll stop.
More in terms
I enjoy this channel.
Of families and clans, and in such structures, nomads see themselves more in terms of families and clans, and in such structures, interactions between tribes of differing cultures are also different. A conquered people are not subjugated in tribes.
Is that a head of that ancient, extinct? It looked like a cross between like a camel and an elephant, but it was like twice the size of an elephant.
Tribes of differing cultures are also different. A conquered people are not subjugated, enslaved, or slaughtered, but simply made part of the tribe and the extended family. Marriages across cultures are more common and widespread than in settled civilizations. You can have a geographic estimate of where which tribe and people were active, but those estimates are often based on accounts by victims of raids. Through that, we can place the Scythians, for example, in the land stretching from Ukraine through the Caucasus to northern Iran, as these tribes raided and plundered Greeks, Thracians, and Iranians, who then wrote about them. But these are not to be understood as lands in the modern sense with borders, but more as a sphere of influence within which the Scythians were active. For the vast enormous steppes themselves, it is difficult to determine who was where, at what point, for how long. What we do know is that there were many. The Scythians, the Proto-Iranian Scythians, also known as the Sarmatians, the Proto-Slavic tribes, the Finno-Ugric tribes, the Proto-Mongols, and up there in the easternmost fringes of Siberia and northern China, we find where the Proto-Turkic people probably came from.
Really? I've seen a video how they make these. It's really cool.
And we know of them from this place because some of them still live there, still as nomads and still worshipping the ancient nature gods, and because they raided the Chinese, who then wrote about them. And what the Chinese had to write about these early Proto-Turkic peoples wasn't very flattering. Then again, the ancient Chinese didn't have much. These early Proto-Turkic peoples wasn't very flattering.
Book of the Demonic Horned Turk Demon.
Then again, the ancient Chinese didn't have much nice to say about anyone besides themselves. Based around the Altai Mountains in various confederations and tribes, these Proto-Turkic tribes would raid Chinese towns and castles. But we also encounter a problem through these Chinese sources. The exact ethnic makeup of the tribes they encountered is somewhat unclear. The large steppe regions east of the Altai Mountains were not just home to the Proto-Turkic, but also to the Proto-Mongol tribes. It is therefore sometimes unclear if a tribe or confederation of tribes that the Chinese historians describe were Turkic or Mongol, since ancient Chinese historians made no distinction and just called all of them barbarians. One of the first large nomadic confederations of the region was the Xianbei, and since the debate over if they were Mongol, Turkic, or a confederation of both is heated and the answer unknown, I won't be trying to answer it here. The Xianbei were overthrown by the Rouran Khaganate, of which it isn't entirely clear if they were Turkic or Mongol, but it is more likely that they were Mongol. To the north of the Rouran Khaganate there was however a tribal confederation which we know was Turkic, the Xiongnu, and it is through them that the peoples of Europe and the Middle East had their first encounters with Turkic peoples when some of them migrated west in late 300, where they were called the Huns. This was the first large-scale invasion by nomadic people of Europe, and it instantly revealed the weaknesses of the type of warfare that the settled kingdoms practiced.
So a huge thing was horseback, right? Being able to charge in, and before the enemy can get to wherever you're raiding, you're long gone and attacking the next town.
Plate armor, heavy chainmail, tight formations, heavy weapons, and slow-moving military tactics were absolutely no match to the swift, fast-moving horse archers in light leather armor. The Huns also introduced the Romans to the recurve bow. This is as simple a technology as a bow bent backward, which increases the tension on the bowstring, allowing the arrows to be shot with more power and speed, which caused the arrows to simply punch through Roman armors, chainmail, and shields with close to no effort. This bow was the result of the nomadic specific specializations required to improve a herd society's life.
Okay, so all right. I was going to say, how did they come up with that? So that just some of the benefits that came from having to keep hunting and hunting and hunting happen to make a great war weapon.
Hunnic tribes invaded Europe, Iran, and northern India and caused the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. However, after defeating their enemies and acquiring vast empires of tributary states, a weakness in the nomad life was exposed. After conquering a settled people, a nomad cannot simply remain a nomad anymore. A settled people cannot simply be integrated into a tribe or family like a different nomadic tribe. And consequently the nomads are trapped into consistently patrolling a hostile land, worked by a people who increasingly despise their overlords. The Hunnic Empire stretched from the North Sea to the Caspian, but after barely half a century they were driven out by the people they had subjugated. However, as the Hunnic Empire collapsed into itself, the 5th century started with a flood of nomadic peoples invading and migrating into settled lands. The Bulgars, Avars, Slavs, Finno-Ugurs, and the Hungarians came from the Eurasian Steppe into Europe throughout the next 4 centuries. But unlike the Huns that preceded them, they all settled and transformed from nomadic peoples into settled kingdoms. And during that time, on the other end of the Eurasian continent, an interesting development was happening. The Ruran Khaganate collapsed and was replaced by the Turkic Khaganate, also known as the Gökturks. After defeating the Ruran Khaganate, the Gökturks would defeat the Iranian Hittites and consolidate power over almost the entire Eurasian steppe. From there, they would continuously launch raids against China and Persia, and it is possible that their conquest of the Eurasian steppes is what caused the great migrations of people into Europe as refugees from the Gökturks. However, by 600, their empire had split into two between a West and an East Khanate. The Eastern Khaganate would spend its history almost constantly raiding Tang dynasty China until it fell to the Turkic Uyghur Khaganate, which itself fell apart into various smaller Khaganates. The Western Göktürk Khanate also fell apart into various smaller Khanates and tribes, and amongst them, one would stand out and do something that no Turkic tribe had done before. The Tatars were Turkic peoples originating in Central Asia, and one of their tribes, during the expansion of the Göktürk Empire and its collapse, settled at the Aral Sea, expanded south into modern-day Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, where they gave up being nomads and converted to Islam. The Seljuks. They became great admirers of their new neighbors, the Samanid Empire of Iran. It was the Samanids who converted the Seljuks to Islam. The Seljuks became increasingly fond of their new Iranian neighbors. They started dressing like their Iranian idols. Seljuk nobility started speaking Persian. They adopted the Persian alphabet, minted Persian coins, built castles in Persian style, copied the Samanids wherever they could, and even formed a military alliance with them. Then the Samanids were overthrown by the Ghaznavids, which the Seljuks disapproved of, especially after the Ghaznavids tried to conquer them. So the Seljuks conquered them right back, and that became a watershed moment. Suddenly, they were the rulers of Persia. They who had started as nomadic...
I'm just picturing like you took on my best friend, that you killed them, I'm gonna kill you. Ah, alright, I got him. Wait, now I'm Persia.
They were the rulers of Persia. They who had started as nomadic herders a few hundred years before, now were the inheritors and the heirs to the great legacy of Iran and all that came with it. Through this, their culture and the way they saw themselves radically changed, and with that, Turkic culture itself changed dramatically. At the time, the Seljuks were probably in the minority amongst the Turkic peoples, as having given up nomadic life and converted to Islam and becoming a settled people. But over the centuries, their influence through their empire would spread into creating a Turkish cultural sphere that stretched from China to the Crimea. As the Seljuks were sitting in their new Persian home, they boarded someone new, Baghdad, the capital of the once great First Islamic Caliphates, center of knowledge and trade in the Middle East, one of the greatest jewels a medieval empire could own, held by the Buyids, who happened to be Shia Muslims, so the Sunni...
I have to continue the spread of Islam, by the way. I'll do that.
...empire could own, held by the Buyids, who happened to be Shia Muslims, so the Sunni Abbasids gave them the permission to conquer it. This moved the Seljuks into the center of the Islamic world, and with this, they boarded yet another prize, the greatest they had seen until then.
The Byzantines?
That last remaining piece of the Roman Empire in Anatolia, the Byzantines. And that prize no longer got out of their heads. Rome, one of the greatest empires of all time, the founders of European civilization, the pinnacle of what an empire could be. The Seljuks changed their imperial seal and battle banners to the double-headed eagle of Rome. They started calling themselves the inheritors and legitimate rulers of the Roman Empire.
I love how they're just going around and either conquering or having something conquered and then conquering the conquerors and then taking it, like in Persia. And they just keep seeing these places and admiring them, and then trying to duplicate what they did.
And went to war, because there could in the end only be one Roman Empire. It went well at first. The Byzantines had recently declared the Armenians to be heretics to the Christian faith, so the Armenians didn't put up much of a fight when the Seljuks came to take the Byzantine Caucasian lands. From there on, they marched into Anatolia. They fought off and defeated 2 crusades called to defeat them. They lost Iran to a Persian uprising, but Anatolia continued to be their main prize. They came within miles of the great prize of Constantinople itself. But events that...
I was first going to be like, what do you mean the Turks are from northeast Siberia. I'm like, how is that possible? But they just kept going down and conquering and then moving and finding another prize. It's great.
They could have never foreseen, in the very place they themselves had come from 3,000 miles away, prevented their final triumph. As in the steppes of Asia, 600 years of Turkic dominance came to an end. It took the Turkic people 600 years to migrate into Central Asia and expand from Central Asia into Persia and the Middle East and eventually into Anatolia. The Mongols only needed 40 years to conquer it all, as well as China. After defeat to the Mongols, the Seljuks fell apart into bickering little fiefdoms and states who all bowed to the Mongols. But far from this being the end of the story, it is merely the start of the next great chapter.
Egypt. All right. Chapter 3, coming soon. This is a great video. I will come with this tomorrow or the next day. I got to continue the Islamic spread video as well. See you next time.